Hala, Haneen, do you hear us?
Fine.
You're sure?
Okay. Haneen?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's Zoom.
Free because he moved his stuff over here. Oh my God, this necklace. This is so cute.
Take off your bag. Thank you. Thanks. I mean,
It's bigger for him.
This is new. I'll never see that. It's so cute.
Okay.
yeah. Then we'll have an apartment. I stay. It's looking good for no station.
Can I just have the ID card? Yeah. Nothing to make the organization.
Yeah. I think this is the main. He's simply good. A bit. And do you have to? Yeah.
I don't even know what this is. It's not even Zoom. So,
Oh yeah,
some loss.
It looks like Zoom.
the meeting is Zoom.
Look, if the link was in some other shit.
That's the Zoom.
I would assume actually. You wouldn't see Zoom. Just that.
That is funny.
Haneen, Hala, would you try to speak now, please?
Hello. Hi, it's Hala. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, like hold on.
Yeah, maybe I can get this. Wait, they could hear us?
Yeah, but like it's just.
Well, I don't see us. Okay, they could hear you. Volume okay? The volume of the speakers. We removed that.
I'm trying to say that from the same way.
I did this Mozambican restaurant to bring Laura. Just in case you do.
That's huge.
I should have gotten myself involved at first. It's like such a tight thing. Super small. Like now they all see. All of them. And they have this so excited I want to have this time. Yeah. And I'm like, I hope my parents never come here. Drinks. I mean, it's like the restaurants. Well, either way, if you want to join, you can. We have the seats. Looks like they're around 8:30.
Hi everyone. I just got off work, so I'm in my car. But I'll come to S5 here soon.
Do you hear us okay?
Hold on one sec. What did you say?
Can you hear us?
Yes, now I can.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, we could start. Speak from there. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, hello everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jimena Osorio Garate. I'm a PhD student here in International Relations and Political Science, and I'm also a member of the Decolonial Action Network at the Graduate Institute. And first of all, welcome. I just want to start by thanking our amazing speakers, Hala and Haneen, who are here with us today, and it's such a privilege to have them here with us. I also really want to thank QISA. I want to thank BDS Genève and the Apartheid Free Zone Switzerland for co-organizing this event with us. And I also want to bring to your attention the Queer Cinema for Palestine Film Festival, which is happening starting today until the 20th of November. So I encourage all of you to check that out if you want to continue the conversation on queer activism, queer rights, and queer liberation in connection with the struggle for Palestinian liberation. So thank you so much. Welcome. I'm super excited to the discussion that we're going to have. And yeah, I'll give the word over to my friends at QISA, who will also have a small introduction. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our event. My name is Jahangir and my pronouns are he, him. And I'm Vice President of Queer International Student Assembly, QISA, at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. We are very excited to see all of you here for this event, as it is a part of a larger conversation we wish to have at the Institute on decolonizing sexuality. QISA has developed the annual Decolonizing Sexuality series, which we host during the month of October to move away from Euro-American-centric queerness that we often see in academic spaces, and especially here at the Institute. Specifically, Euro-American-centric conceptions on queerness, queer activism, identity, and action. It allows us to reimagine LGBTQ spaces and discussions at the Graduate Institute and beyond. It's also a practice of reflexivity for not just us within QISA, but for everyone within the Institute. I'm really happy to see that the Decolonizing Sexuality series is going beyond the month of October and becoming QISA's one of the main focuses. And through the year, we are having more and more events on decolonizing sexuality. Today, we are very thrilled to have our speakers, Haneen and Hala, and our moderator, Izzeddin. I thank all of you for accepting our invitation and being here with us today. I also thank the Colonial Action Network, Apartheid Free Zone, and BDS Genève for initiating and planning this event. I will now pass the floor to Izzeddin to introduce today's discussion. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. As my colleagues mentioned, we're truly honored today to have brilliant speakers with whom we will discuss decolonial activism in Palestine. We will talk about the experience of two well-known organizations, Tala'at and alQaws, highlighting the entanglement between sexuality, settler colonialism, sexual violence, and national representations. So I will try to briefly introduce the speakers, and I hope that the first section of the discussion today will allow them to introduce their organizations. So we're talking today with Haneen Maikey, who's a queer feminist organizer, co-founder, and former director of the LGBT and queer organization alQaws for sexual and gender diversity in Palestinian society. We will also be speaking with Hala Marshoud, who's a Palestinian political and feminist organizer, part of the feminist movement Tala'at, and a researcher in political economy. As I mentioned before, we would like to start with a brief introduction of both alQaws and Tala'at. So I don't know, Hala, would you please start, tell us about the experience of Tala'at, the context in which it has developed. How did it start and what are its main goals? And then we will be hearing from Haneen about the experience of alQaws.
Yes, definitely. Hello, everyone. I'm Hala. I'm very happy to be here with you today, and thank you for the invitation. Yes, as mentioned, I am a member of Tala'at movement, and what I can just say from the start maybe is that Tala'at is a movement in the making. Let's say, I think it's a culmination of intensified and continued discussions among Palestinian women here in Palestine and also in the diaspora. Almost all women in Tala'at, I can say, came from different political movements in the past or were part of different kinds of organizing. And all of them felt that something was missing and that these spaces are not allowing the women to organize and to move around issues that concern the lived realities and the daily realities of women here. And at the same time, in 2018 and in 2019, cases of femicide have been increasing. And were cases that exposed the institutional complicity with violence against women. And we just felt that something needs to be done. Now, maybe just to say that our first official launch was the 26th of September 2019, where we took to the streets in different Palestinian geographies and the diaspora. But before I just think maybe it's important to put this clarification from the start is that even though our first kind of official event and organizing was focused on violence against women, but we, from the start, were saying that we as a feminist movement, we are here to talk about all kinds of violence, all forms of violence that are practiced on those that are most marginalized. And also, even though the first events of Tala'at focused on violence against women, it was also not from an identity politics kind of place where we focus solely on women. Focusing on women is came as part of our need to focus the voices and the experiences and the lived realities of marginalized groups within society more broadly. And so if I go back to the first kinds of stages of Tala'at, it wasn't clear where we're heading. It's just that we felt that something needs to be done. We just wanted to put the issue of violence against women on the streets, because historically these kinds of issues were either confined to, were either considered women-only issues that can be dealt with in the realm of feminist or feminine organizations and NGOs, and not part of political action. And these issues were sidelined by the traditional political discourse in Palestine, and they were not prioritized, and this was said clearly that these issues are not prioritized. These issues can be dealt with after we're liberated from colonialism and so on. And this I can talk about later on. So our first kind of launch was the 26th of September 2019, where we took to the streets, protesting and putting out there the issue of violence against women. And I remember that it was really important to us to make these demonstrations defragmented ones, meaning that it was really important to us that demonstrations happen in the different geographies of Palestine in the diaspora, in an era where fragmentation is getting even more entrenched, also by the Israeli colonial regime, but also by the traditional political leadership and political discourse that is fragmenting us. So it was from a radical feminist point of view that we wanted to defragment Palestine and to unite women in the different places in Palestine as a process of creating hope also as well, hope for change and hope for imagining Palestine. And I'm going to talk about imagination later on. And this is how we became to be. And at first it wasn't clear, is it a sole protest happening? Are we a movement? But it was clear that we are becoming a movement. And people actually, the protest at first gained a lot of attention, and we were treated as a movement, and we were even called Tala'at, even though the event was called Tala'at, not us. We didn't call ourselves Tala'at, but suddenly we became Tala'at, and it made us realize that there is a need, and I guess there's always a need for feminist organizing, but there is a need for us to create a defragmented and decentralized feminist movement in Palestine, and that is essential. And I'm going to be frank, it's not an easy task, and it's not something that has been done a lot in Palestine, and it is a continued journey and a continued process, but hopefully we are on the way. Sorry, I think I talked too much.
No, that was really helpful. So, Haneen, would you please? Okay, Haneen, would you please tell us more about alQaws?
Of course. Thank you for hosting me. Thank you. Can you hear me? Because my internet is a bit unstable.
No. The internet is fine. Can you speak up a little bit?
Perfect. I will talk about alQaws. So my name is Haneen Maikey, and thank you, Izzeddin, for pronouncing my name correctly. That's the first time ever. And I'm based in Jerusalem until last year, 2020. I was the director of alQaws for Sexual and Gender Diversity in Palestinian Society. alQaws is a queer, anti-colonial feminist organization unlike Tala'at, in like early 2000, we came together to explore our sexual and gender kind of identities. And through that process, we were like connecting more and more to what's happening, not only inside the initial like group that we created back then, but also with what is happening around us in our society, in Palestine in general. And like the beginning of alQaws was in the middle of the second Intifada, which is was one of the most hectic really political periods in Palestine, at least to my generation, who we call like the generation of second Intifada, referring that our like political consciousness, basically, that was like the event that shaped our political consciousness. And that was like also the same timing that we created and started to build alQaws, questioning how we can be queers in this like place. And slowly, with a lot of like grassroots work, as I mentioned, alQaws is a grassroots organization working with local leadership in different cities and have a structure of a national leadership that in a way hold the strategic commitments of the movement. And in these couple of years, we started to shape what I called our first kind of political commitment as a young queer movement. And you can recognize these like commitments, first of all, in our name, right? Like we are not called alQaws for LGBT Palestinians. We are not called alQaws for gay rights. We from the beginning understood that our main like kind of vision is to open a conversation, a social and a political conversation around sexual and gender diversity, and framing this issue as a social issue and not a topic or a struggle for one group. And that like lays down there a lot of our like political commitments. The second one was like that we cannot explore our sexual and gender identities in disconnect in what's happening around us, right? And we started to see the political discourse using sexual and gender dynamics. Our stories started to be used by the Zionist, the Israeli government. So we like quickly understood, and we were also in a really simple kind of level. Every time we left a meeting, we were met with colonialism and occupation, right? And slowly these conversations started to be really connected, and this is how alQaws became. And we will talk a lot about it. It's the essence of alQaws and the most critiqued point about alQaws. It's political discourse that sexual and gender diversity is intertwined with the colonial context of Palestine. alQaws been around since 2001, so it's 2 decades now. And like I love that Hala said, like we are in a political movement in a building. I think a political movement is always in a building. And even if you are like finished and close 2 decades, there's a lot of work all the time to engage, right, with what's happening around us. Because like in the last like 2 years, we can all clearly say after COVID-19, what's happening in Palestine, that everything is changing, right? Like the political context, Palestine, the discourse around Palestine, alQaws itself, how we perceive queerness, the emerge of like Tala'at and like really expanding the public space and the street as like a space of protest, even for social issues. So I think like that's where alQaws now, and like really studying the past and this like long 2 decades and looking to the future of how this like queer movement gonna move forward, both holding the commitment of like dismantling patriarchal violence and economic violence and colonial violence.
Right, thank you. So Haneen, you know, you mentioned the entanglement between queerness and colonialism, or the colonial violence against queer people and women. And we have heard a lot about pinkwashing. It has been well addressed in the context of Palestine. So putting this notion in its broader political context is necessary, I think. And as alQaws has explained on more than one occasion, pinkwashing is a symptom, but settler colonialism is the root sickness. Would you please elaborate more on this, how pinkwashing as a form of colonial violence contributes to the elimination and oppression of the indigenous population of Palestine?
Maybe as first I can give some kind of a context about the trajectory of like the concept of pinkwashing, because like how in the last like 20 years we came as also queer international communities around the globe, and through the growing of the BDS movement, how we got to engage with pinkwashing. And I think over a decade ago, even more, Palestinian activists started to use this like pinkwashing term, and also queer international, usually that is linked to the BDS movement. And it refers to how the Israeli state and its supporters, of course, use the language of gay and lesbians and queerness to direct, of course, international attention away from the oppression and occupation and colonialism. It's that simple, right? And we saw that as like part of a like large kind of a rebrand Israel, big kind of campaign led by the Israeli government, LGBT groups in Israel, that like promoting some kind of a myths around like gay Israel friendly, right? Like you could see trans folks serving in the army, I don't know, different things like gay people being working in, like there is a like gay tourism, the Tel Aviv Pride, right? We could see a lot of like these kind of big events. And the strategy that we all like engaged with, both like locally and internationally, was to basically counter these like campaigns by more campaigns, right? Like it's a bit calling for boycott for the Tel Aviv Film Festival, calling for boycotting different university gigs that like hosting a trans occupation soldier, and on, right? And I think that was okay, because it was focused on what is the international audience like needs in this like kind of moments, and how a lot of LGBT groups could engage with BDS. But for alQaws, it was all the time something is missing, because like the term propaganda was so limiting to what we are seeing on the ground. And I want to like focus on what we are seeing on the ground and the experience of queer Palestinian who live here, and like link it as Izzeddin to the colonial kind of practice, right? And we learned a lot in the last like 3 years of how pinkwashing actually is a colonial tool, right? A violent colonial tool that like contribute to the colonial Zionist project of fragmentation, right? Basically, pinkwashing discourse is saying to queer Palestinians that your family, your society hates you, want to kill you, you are not part of your society, right? All of these like discourses working on really re-isolating queer Palestinians from their family. And I'm not forgetting, of course, the social violence, and we will come back to this, the already queer Palestinian feeling, right? So it's basically this like mean kind of abuse to the pain of queer Palestinians against them, right? And that's like a really psychologically and mentally and also politically, it's really dangerous, right? And it also gives the Palestinian Society this link that queer Palestinians are linked to the Israeli government, right? If there's source of information is what this pinkwashing discourse is talking about us. So it's reconnecting in the minds of a lot of Palestinians, activists, political activists, leaders, how the queer movement is actually part of the Israeli system, right? Or at least is a weak link in our society that the Israeli government could use, which is also a myth. Right? And we could see these like a couple of things, and maybe one last thing, and I will give the floor to Hala, is the erasure, right, of in the discourse of pinkwashing. If you really analyze the discourse, there is no alQaws. There is no queer Palestinian movement. There is no Haneen Maikey or other like activists, right? There is only victims who's like Palestinian queers and Israelis who are their savior, right? And this like really destroying the, flipping the relationship from colonizer colonized, right, to a victim and savior, and really erasing any hope that there is queer movement in Palestine, there is change. There are like progressive forces, there are queer Palestinians that already created some like possibilities of life, of living inside this like occupied and colonized place. And I think the erasure of like the Palestinian queer movement and really putting queer Palestinians only under this label of victimhood and from running of our society, that's like what I think all of us should engage in, really dismantling this like pinkwash campaign, and not only use the strategy of like counter campaigns to different pinkwashing activities around the globe. I don't know if that was like enough, and I would love to expand more.
No, that was great. Thank you. It was really informative. So Hala, you know, both women and the queer issue have undergone several forms of representation in Palestine, starting from the Eurocentric perception of the Palestinian, you know, of Palestinians as all non-Western societies as less civilized, to the homo-nationalism and the systematic discourse of pinkwashing that Haneen explained. But also there's another, you know, form of representation which is associated with, I would say, domestic power dynamics. And, you know, I am curious if you can tell us more about that. How does it feel to lead an anti-colonial struggle while, you know, negotiating the very definition of the Palestinian collective that doesn't represent enough women and the queer people?
Yes, thank you, Az. I mean, we're usually accustomed and we're even taught to look at these things that you are talking about as separated levels. For us, it never felt like we're trying to balance different kinds of concerns. Rather, I think the issue is how we bring emancipatory feminist analysis and form of action into existing causes and struggles and discussions. And maybe I can make it a bit more simplified by saying that usually here we're accustomed to look at feminist movements as talking solely about women, and that there is no space for feminist movements to talk about the, you know, traditional politics, or to have a political analysis. And I can maybe bring just a really recent example, and it is the last May-June uprising in Palestine, where Palestinians in their different geographies and the world took to the streets to protest the continued Israeli practices of dispossession and impoverishment and colonial violence. And we in Tala'at, we tried to put forward our analysis of the uprising, even if between amongst ourselves and not to the world at the moment. And our reading was that the uprising the uprising was where the most marginalized group in our society took to the streets, the ones that are usually working class and easily criminalized. And those were the groups that were taken to the streets. And suddenly we weren't waiting for the traditional elitist political leadership to tell us what to do. People were regaining politics and agency into their own hands. And this is what we actually say in Tala'at, that change comes from the margins, and that politics should come from the different lived reality in the daily realities, in the daily pain of people. And at the same time, we know that violence in our society is still happening, and that these kinds of moments put on movements like Tala'at even more pressure to work toward change within society, to make it a safer society, to make it a just society for everyone. And I think this is what being a feminist movement in Palestine means. It's putting the emancipatory feminist politics and the emancipatory feminist lens and seeing the world with this lens, basically. Seeing the world with the lens of understanding power relations, of understanding oppression and how oppression operates through the different structures, and the intertwining of the different structures and how they affect us, basically, how they affect people, how they affect people's daily realities. And in that, Tala'at joins a tradition of recent feminist discourse and movement happening in the world. Tala'at doesn't happen and didn't happen in a vacuum. Tala'at happened in an atmosphere where feminist organizers in the world more and more were linking issues of patriarchal violence with already existing colonial and capitalistic roots of oppression. And Tala'at joins this tradition by trying to put forward as core values issues or core values of liberation and justice in the more broader sense. And I guess it's something that I can talk a bit more about later on.
Okay, thank you. Haneen, would you like to add anything about that?
Yeah, maybe I will start with, it's really interesting that what Hala was saying. I was just like going back and asking myself why like the critique on alQaws was so strong, and still like people write books, and I just read an article in the Zionist Haaretz about the alQaws and the Palestinian queer movement. Why everyone is so obsessed with us being anti-colonial? Why like Tala'at's first like demonstration, right? Everyone was with anti-colonial and feminism, and we asked ourselves a lot like about like how this like why and how this became the accusation of alQaws, right? And like I'm now like reflecting about like how there is no Palestinian queer different like organizations, right? And the Palestinian queer movements almost only organization is the anti-colonial organization, right? And how this dynamic always like really provoked a lot of queers who asking from two places. One is why you should waste resources. We are like one queer organization with such a limited resources. We should work homophobia, right? And the second one was saying that's like even a homophobic thing to be an anti-colonial, because that means you are putting more resources on things that there's millions of organizations working on, right? That was like a really kind of a debate that's still very strong and very like impacting the movement. The second thing that I want to like say, and the last thing is like the whole discourse about representation and intersectionality. And I think that idea that even that question is unnatural, right? Like you are asking Hala and me, like how we are dealing with this tension, and in our experience, that tension is our life. That is like how these like things are like shape us. all of these like violence. And I stopped looking at intersectionality as like really this simple thing, but rather really this like situation that you cannot tell if you are living in colonized Palestine, where actually start the patriarchal violence and the social violence, and when it ends as a colonial violence, when is an economic violence, right? So these like really to untangle them is just almost impossible, right? It just really just like centering your experience as someone who live here and learn about how these oppression shape us, how we could confront them and really build these kinships and relationships so we can like really resist and confront. But really there is, in my opinion, these are not two separate things. And the last thing, and really it's the last thing, I think there is a fallacy between like in a lot of these discourse between what is political analysis and what is strategy, right? And you could have an anti-colonial like discourse and still provide services for queer people. These are not contradicting things, right? And people like get stuck in the political analysis as is your work. Your work is the people you meet, and have interaction with and change with them and change them, and you commit to change, right? That is political movements. And then that is the impact coming from this like relationship, not from a small campaign here and there that you can do once a year. So that's really important for me about intersectionality, because like I'm done with these divisions. Like we should just have a more kind of a understanding how colonialism actually impacts social violence, how it shapes societies, our psyche, our mentality, our relationship, right? Our hope, our imagination, and that these are the things that we are busy with inside the queer movement, at least the alQaws kind of part of it.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting, especially what you said about the impossible distinction between the colonial and the domestic here. That was really helpful, and I would like to hear from Hala about intersectionality. We have heard a lot about this term, right? I wonder, I mean, it's well explained in the academic sphere, but like, what does it mean on the ground when it comes to activism?
Yeah, I think maybe before addressing the question directly, I feel like problematizing the notion a little bit, only because I think intersectionality also it became a buzzword lately, and it's often talked about in an extremely abstract sense. And it's usually looking at Palestinian women as being both a woman and a colonized, and how these two paths intersect together. And I think the picture, and as Haneen already kind of started to talk about, is that the picture is more complex in my opinion. My reading of our reality is that structures of power, they operate together in a unified process of continued oppression and continued exploitation in the world. For example, we live in a capitalist global system, and we live by capitalist values. Women are trapped in homes because they are stripped of basic needs. And then they face violence inside homes. And then they are not getting protection because no political and social system in the world is made for the benefit of women or oppressed groups more generally. And the Israeli colonial regime has widened both class differences amongst us, giving privileges to groups and impoverishing others. And it's also historically strengthened traditional tribal relations within our society. And who paid the price were basically the weaker strands society. Let's take, for example, internal violence and crime within the Palestinian society, especially in 48, as an example of how the colonial state with the financial systems and institutions created unlivable conditions for Palestinians who seek money through the black market or whatever. And violence against women, for example, should be also seen as part of this this reality that demands us to provide a reading of how these different structures operate on us, and seeing dynamics played on us is not a metaphor. It's not imagining me being a woman and there is patriarchy here and colonial violence here and economic violence here. And it's like Haneen said, I think these things are so intertwined that we can't even say where this kind of violence starts and where it ends. When a woman is beaten up in her home, she is facing massive amounts of levels of structures of power, whether it's patriarchy, whether it's what she faces because of the fact that there is no social structure out there that can protect women in a reality where police doesn't protect women, and we're also not demanding police intervention, but there's also no other social organizing, because also Israel deliberately and intentionally crippled also our social solidarity structures. So what is there left for women who are threatened, or who are facing violence, or queer people who are living in continued fear? And I think it is our responsibility as political movements to think about how we practice social solidarity that comes against this continued violence and violent practices practiced on us by these very linked structures of power that are operating on us.
Thank you. So it's not merely that the domestic and the colonial are intersected, but they coexist together in this complex reality. But I don't know, is that anything changing? We have seen Palestinian women speak through the media and social media, like in the latest events. They talked about the experience of uprooting and elimination. They were also active in the protest against the Palestinian Authority, and we have seen how both the Israeli settler colonial state and the Palestinian Authority seem to try to counter and resist these changes by arresting women, hacking their phones, and trying to defame them. So I wonder here to what extent we can talk about an actual change in the politics of representation in the Palestinian society. I mean, Haneen, would you like to start?
I will start maybe just talking generally about like the morality and like the how these institutions actually use it to the persecution of also women and like queers. Maybe I will just share the incident alQaws had with the Palestinian Authority police and the persecution, the statement that they issued in also 2019, actually persecuting all of alQaws activities in the West Bank. And not only that, we could discuss that if that was only that part, but also calling for citizens to participate in the persecution and arrest and call the police if they know about queers in their surrounding, right? And that is never happened in Palestine. Never, like even the most corrupt institution like the PA didn't call publicly to citizens to basically participate in the persecution of other citizens, right? And that is like really interesting if we can, and the discourse, of course, the protection of family values, Palestinian traditions, and all of these like broad kind of concepts. And all of this in order to also have to gain it's a political game, right? There's a dynamic and there's a political gain from doing that and taking that role, specifically in Palestine when Fatah and the PA, right, is like in a way putting themselves in front of Hamas as a religious kind of more obvious that will protect family, right? But these are the same institutions who kill families, right? Like they are not protecting family values, they're also killing families. So it's really interesting to see the contradiction and like the abuse of queer rights to create this like moral panic. And we could see it also a couple of years ago, someone told me, see what's happening in Egypt now with all of this moral panic with the LGBT movement, soon it will happen to Palestine because these people copy from each other, right? It's the same system. They don't need a lot of meetings around it. It's like a very common kind of practice that a lot of these authorities using to create this like panic, social panic around morality, around like women who dressing differently in protest, women who said used bad language because women don't behave like this, or queers who dare to be public and be active, right? And what's really interesting is, and that's also happening with the different Zionist strategies, but the PA, when they persecuted a lot of our activists, they were told, our activists, that they're not interested in us. They're not interested in the public activists. They know the names, they have the numbers, they know where we live. That's not interesting. What is interesting for these people is to actually threat younger generation, people who's like socially have more social, a complicated kind of context, people who have a complicated economical context, people, women specifically, trans people, right? You could see how low it is. Like if they would persecute us, we could have a conversation and even a public conversation, right? But that is like where it's a really kind of a low strategy. And I think that PA didn't fail to play this role in the last like 5 years. Every time queers took the streets or feminists took the streets or women representation was so spoken about, right? Though women's participation in the political scene in Palestine, that's oldest than the PA, right? Like it's just like a really interesting kind of a dynamic. So I will stop here and give Hala the floor, because in recent years there was a lot of like incidents that really reflect this kind of a interesting kind of a dynamic, and not only the violence, but also the very clear resistance and confrontation that also the queer movement and the feminist movement had in front of these like attacks, right? It was not like an attack that went quietly. And I think the win was to the streets still, though these like oppression powers are like bigger and have more money and have more plans and have more resources. But I think there is something, and if we are talking about impact, I think the reply and like the clear one, the full of like really power from women and queers and allies, that was something we didn't see in the last 5 years. That's a new thing, I feel.
Should I just go ahead?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yes, I guess, like you said, in my opinion, there is change. And this change cannot be detached from years of feminist and queer activism and organizing happening in Palestine that paved the way for this to happen. whether it's through Tala'at being in the streets, and also through queer and queer activism gaining more and more visibility in Palestine during the few years. So I think, yes, some things have paved the way for a positive change, and both the Israeli colonial system and also the Palestinian Authority both knew perfectly well that women were an integral part of the recent events and the recent uprising. And when the Palestinian Authority targeted women, it was exploiting existing oppressive and social structures that are going to threaten women and are going to deter women from going back to the streets. But we also, I think they also knew that deterring women would mean the end of the organizing. And I think they were trying to hit on all of these levels. But I think what is also a positive change, that is something that's beyond simply representation, is that these kinds of things that the Palestinian Authority does, for example, it's not new. It happened before in many occasions. Women were directly targeted, and as Haneen said, there were talks about what they were dressed and how they were talking to the police and using bad language and so on. And unfortunately, also those who were politically active with us on the streets also sometimes played along with these allegations, but allegations, you know. But what I think is a positive change is that this time, because there were these types of queer and feminist organizing happening throughout the years, that this time there were political feminist and queer movements that were putting out statements out there about how the PA is behaving, and putting clear statements against the PA as an institution in itself, regardless of its specific actions, and what it means to have a body like the Palestinian Authority within the Palestinian Society serving Israel and its colonial agendas, and also how the PA operates against certain groups in society. And there was a statement, and I remember that when the PA started and its civilian arm started posting photos and taking pictures and so on, I remember that in that day we were so concerned about being in contact with the different women, seeing what's happening, if women are being threatened, and that didn't happen before. And I think this is a really positive change that has been happening, and I think we saw the fruits. We saw the fruits in that moment. And going back to the issue of representation, I think, like Haneen said, women have always been part of political activism, and were always part of the streets. And I know that in this uprising, it became way more amplified, and it's true. It could be that more and more women were taken to the streets, but it's also, let's be cautious from over exaggerating. Like, we know that violence is still persistent in our society, and patriarchal and chauvinistic structures are still operating, and such moments do not eliminate social dynamics and power dynamics within society. If inside the demonstration itself, for example, where different people are protesting for the same cause. So I think it's important to look at it in a more complex way, because sometimes the question of representation can become overly simplistic, I think, and wouldn't show the picture in its entirety. But I can say that what is happening is indeed a moment for us to reflect on and to think how to move forward with it, and not treat it as an ended success or or an achieved goal, and that's that.
Thank you. Finally, we live in the time of divided Palestine. We're talking about separate Palestinian isolated communities in Jerusalem, inside Israel, in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip. So my question, while the traditional leadership has, I would say, played along with this colonial division, we have seen Tala'at and alQaws organizing events in all historic Palestine. So can we talk today about like how queer and feminist activism can go beyond this colonial division? If you can explain from like not only organizing activities, but also while trying to extend our understanding of the Palestinian collective and make it more inclusive. We have seen this twist to extend our understanding of Palestine as well. So what do you think about that?
Shall I start?
Yes, please.
So I have to say, first of all, like the colonial divisions and fragmentation is a very strong violent system, right? Like, and it doesn't only like appears in like the disconnect between different like Palestinian groups, is sometimes with Palestinians themselves, like me with myself, right? Like fragmentation in every level, right? And that's why I like mentioned that like part in the pinkwashing, why pinkwashing is colonial violence. Saying that, I think alQaws has a unique kind of a structure, and maybe it's related partially to our story that we actually started in Jerusalem before even the beginning or the end of the annexation wall, right? Like going to Ramallah or going to, it's not like an open space, you can just jump from place to place, but it was easier. Like alQaws started with people from Haifa and Ramallah and Jerusalem from the beginning. So for us, that was like really natural to continue like this, right? And later on, we started to really explore what that means, because we engaged with our members, right? Our members were from everywhere. So we actually built something and reflect where people are coming from, right? And while committing to that all the time, and I have to admit, not with a lot of political analysis or an amazing kind of a smart ways, but just really going with it, right? Like these are our members, this is how we met, this is how we created alQaws. So like in a way, and organically, maybe we built some kind of a structure that is I call it an anti-colonial structure, right? In every level of alQaws, in terms of like the leadership, the local and the national, the staff, the board, the allies that we work with, the different coalitions, even like the supporter we had when we were attacked from the PA, you could see like all of Palestine in it, right? And that was like a really interesting political kind of project, because we were able to build one movement across colonial borders, right? This is like alQaws would be the first time someone from Nablus will meet someone from Haifa, right? And someone from Ramallah will sit with someone even from, I don't know, Nazareth, right? And not in a fetishizing way, like in a real way of discussing privilege, differences, really exploring all of the stories, right? Not one story. And I think that that potentially could create a lot of contradictions and conflicts. But if you give space to really engage with the reality of these divisions that create more divisions and more privileges and more different contexts, right? It's not about in a way erasing the differences, right? It's actually committing to bring everyone in the same room and discuss our like queer and anti-colonial commitment from these places. It's it was a long journey. It's never an ending kind of a journey, right? The reality always changing, and who are we as Palestinians living in these different places all the time changes. Hala mentioned the May uprising and the framework of unity, right? That just like started to be like the main thing. And I think that was like beautiful, but also risky, because we ran to connect on our sameness, right? Instead of really, and I know that because it was a moment in life that we were all like really looking for the positive side, right? But I think building this like unity should focus on the differences, not that we are all Palestinians, but how we are different as Palestinians, and how these different like kind of contexts created, I don't know, different groups, different like perspective, different lived experiences, which is more important. So I think that was the, we were proud that we built a movement that is above colonial borders, that is actually, and maybe I will link it to my comment about change. And I want to say something cheesy and connected to this, because like I feel like everyone in the organizing kind of community is waiting for the change to happen. Right, talking about impact measuring strategies, and we are forgetting to live the change, because I didn't have queer friends 10 years before, and I didn't have a mom that I could talk with, and I didn't have feminist allies who could walk with me in the streets, and I didn't have 70 NGOs that could like sign on like a support letter for alQaws, right? All of these things we live it, and we all the time like keep like waiting for the change. And it was really interesting the last like couple of years, actually the change that we saw is the end of denial on queer issues, not the end of violence, right? Not the acceptance of Palestinian society. See how like impact and change, they're like so small in a larger kind of level, but so huge on a personal level, right? And really living these both levels and like live really in a way, not all the time wait for the change and the work, but also live it and see all of these like elements creating new realities and new possibilities. And that is what is decolonial for me. And that is what is resisting colonial regime in Palestine. And that's how I connect with my society. And I forgot everything else I wanted to say.
Thank you. Hala?
Yeah, I think I can start from saying that defragmentation was a core thing and the key practice that we in Tala'at wanted to practice basically. And because we understood what years of fragmentation meant to the Palestinian society, and also that creating change needs this defragmented collective process. And we were trying to have groups for Tala'at in the different Palestinian geographies in a way that happened, and suddenly many questions rose up that actually portray how fragmentation is actually became so deeply part of our realities and of our relationships, and that they cannot be easily erased. And we understood that in some places there is a need to focus on certain issues in a place that others might find irrelevant to them, but at the same day we are talking about the same struggle, we are talking about the same cause, and we want to make broader claims and broader statements about Palestine and about our realities. But then differences always came up, And I guess, like Haneen said, it's not the question is not how we bridge differences or erase differences. It's how we live with differences, but also try to imagine a kind of society that defies at least the political fragmentation that we have been living. And I want to say something about this political fragmentation, because fragmentation also came because political elites in Palestine have defragmented the cause as well. We are living today in a reality where in the West Bank, there is the whole notion of statehood, or the facade of statehood even. And in 48, there is the whole move to integrate Palestinians within the Israeli system around citizenship and being citizens within the Israeli state. And Gaza is completely disconnected, and the diaspora are completely forgotten. So this is the political atmosphere that we are operating in Palestine. And what we as a feminist movement wanted to say, actually, that we are here to imagine a certain kind of Palestine. First of all, our journey for liberation from colonialism holds in its core an imagination of what we want Palestine to look like, and how the journey towards liberation and the free Palestine looks like as well. And I think a lot of people during the years in political movements, they treat liberation as kind of this automatic, mechanical thing that, okay, you get rid of Israel, everything will be fine, or you get rid of Israel, and then we'll deal with our internal issues. And what we came to say in Tala'at is that no, our journey for freedom should in itself be just, because the Palestinian cause is a cause of justice. That's the main thing about the Palestinian cause. It's a cause of justice. It concerns every person that wants to live in a world that is just and that is free. And we can't be selective when we talk about justice. We either hold justice as a core value when we talk about politics or not. But what we were trying to say in Tala'at is that justice and freedom are core values through which we look at the world. So that's one level. And the second level is that we put forward, or we're trying to put forward, another element that was completely disregarded throughout the years, is that how we want Palestine to look. We know of a lot of cases in the world that went through decolonization in a way, but turned out to have a new liberal and very exploitative system, for example, operating on people. Is this what we want in Palestine? Do we want in Palestine oppressive system? Do we want class violence in Palestine? Do we want all of these things happening in Palestine after we're freed from colonialism? No, we want a place that is just. We want a place that is safe for its different groups. And this is not an automatic action. This is something that you always do. This is something that is built in your action towards change. I don't think we can ever reach a point where we say everything is perfect now. We either constantly act as people who want change, or we are going to find things that we want to change, but it is how we operate, how we practice, what tools do we use in that journey, and which kind of values do we carry with us while we do it. I think we are going through we want to go through a process in Palestine that sees the different dynamics and understand the different dynamics that are operating on us and against us. And the reality is really, the reality holds many layers. And it's this untangling, continued untangling of these different layers throughout the journey. And as I said, we don't operate in a vacuum. We are putting forward with other feminists around the world an approach that sees feminism as a lens through which to look at the world, to see inequalities, to see injustices, to see power relations, to see oppression from the most basic levels to the most complex. And I guess this is what makes us act. It's this drive to change what we are seeing and change these dynamics that are constantly working on us and against us. I think I talked a lot about many things together, but I hope I managed to give a clear answer.
It was clear and well connected. Thank you so much. I think we should now open the floor for questions and comments. Maybe, do we have,
No,
go ahead, please.
First, thank you both so much. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Yeah, no, thank you both. I loved everything that you both said. I'm so interested and fascinated with both of your work. And I just wanted to ask a little bit about this question about how do we balance the tension between national liberation and queer and feminist liberation. And I think that I'm from Uganda, so like we also deal with this sort of idea of like a politics of purity in certain ways, but it's different because we're not in like a colonial context. We're in a post-colonial context, and I wanted to sort of ask about like in Palestine, particularly like when there's so much tension on the Palestinian oppression and like when there's so much critique about Palestinian activism, how do you negotiate these tensions as like a group of like organizers operating across a geography that is very fragmented, while like, you know, sort of silencing or dealing with like the critique that amounts from like everywhere, from, you know, like academics and like from activists elsewhere and from, you know, people who are in the diaspora, et cetera. I guess like how do you navigate this like sort of like empire of critique, you know, as some people call it?
So we should, yeah, you can, Haneen and Hala, please go ahead, you can answer, and then we will check if we have other questions. Hala, do you want to start?
I think Haneen, you can go ahead.
Okay. Right.
I just, I want to make sure that I understood the question, saying how we as feminists deal with the critique by other non-Palestinians on the Palestinian. Like, if you could just clarify the question, because I wasn't sure, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. No, I was just sort of asking because like in my context or in my experience in Uganda, people don't write about Uganda and like about queer organizing in Uganda. You know, it's like massively understudied. There's not a lot of attention paid to it. And I guess in like the case of Palestine, like you're saying, like these concepts like pinkwashing sort of have lives of their own and become subjects to critique from people everywhere, come under like a lot of criticism from people who aren't necessarily directly involved in organizing on a day-to-day basis. So I was just sort of wondering like how you as organizers deal with that and how you sort of navigate that complicated environment. Yeah, I don't know if that makes it a little bit clear.
If Hala, it helps, I can give 2 examples from like alQaws work and like the whole conversation about nationalism, right? And also accusing alQaws to be a nationalist organization, as if like nationalism is like a bad. And I think like Hala, you introduced some kind of this revolutionary nationalism, right? That like looks at the liberation of Palestine and like including all of its issues, right? It's not only liberation from colonialism. And I think we agree on that. I think what's really interesting that two things that I could share. One, like in the last like 3 demonstrations, and alQaws started in 2019 to organize this like street protest. And if you analyze, and this is like also in the article I sent you in Haaretz, and that of course that I'm critiquing, I'm not like supporting, that is just like the whole discourse of Palestinians was not about like the first demonstration. There was like 2 attacks. One about the Muslim woman who's wearing a hijab, right? And the other one on our use of the Palestinian flag, right? These 2 symbols that I think that you could summarize everything like in Palestine, right? Was the main kind of 2 elements that like alQaws was attacked by, right? In the article I sent you, this guy talks about like how this destroyed the fantasy of queer people, right? Who want to just come and enjoy being LGBT, because it was directly abused by nationalists, right? That was actually saying that we are not part of Palestine, right? That national symbols like the flag is not ours, the hatta or the kufi were critiqued by like our activists wearing them, right? You could see about like how this was used as another exclusion kind of a tool, and it's really interesting because people didn't raise the Palestinian flag to say only liberate Palestine. It was also a statement that is part of us, right? And like the hierarchy of struggle that you're speaking about, right? Like liberation first, then social issues. And I think if we are talking about change and impact, this is exactly the moment we are in now, that this is not acceptable anymore. There is a lot of movements, young movements and political movements that like adopting new ways of like really thinking about liberation and Palestine ourselves. This thing is not like, this is another way of fragmentation, right? Or a political fragmentation. There is a new movement now that's saying, and it's not only Tala'at and alQaws. They're saying that nationalism is bigger than that, right? And like, and nationalism should not be used to exclude us. But like the discourse of hierarchy is really first liberation, then the rest of the issue, it's really still central. A lot of like radical and left Palestinians and using it against alQaws and against a lot of like other movement. It's like I specifically with a friend wrote an article about like how this the hierarchy of struggle and like the priorities of the Palestinian national project, it's still reflected in every meeting I have with friends, right? Like this is a valid, in a way, it's a question that's still alive, right? And probably alQaws and other movement didn't provide enough right discourse or language or analysis that we could just move forward. And I think we are in a beginning somehow, right? We are in a time that's saying maybe we have other like ways of understanding the national project, and this is not how you understand it. And this is one thing. And the second thing, you are not gonna use it against me. That is not acceptable. We are going to expose every time it's been used against us, right? To exclude us again and again and again. And that has, and I will refer, maybe I will send you, Izzeddin, a couple of articles, and that also has a history from the from the first intifada to now that we have these conversations, right? Why morality is so central, why hierarchy of struggle is so central, why priorities discourse still, right? And I could send a couple of articles to give you some kind of a historical context, but I have to say, like, at least like Black and radical Black analysis, that was what helped me specifically to really broaden my idea about nationalism, that often has been like, dismissed as this like, fascist, nationalist kind of approach.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
Yes, of course. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think Haneen said it perfectly well, but this whole issue of the hierarchy of struggles, I'm going to talk about it from two different yet very, very related examples. I remember that in the first demonstration for Tala'at, in the demonstration that took place in Jerusalem, once the Palestinian flag was raised, of course, the Israeli forces immediately attacked the demonstration. And I remember getting questions from people that said, why did you hold the Palestinian flag? You were protesting against femicide, and you know that in Jerusalem, once you raise the Palestinian flag, you're going to get attacked, and this is actually going to jeopardize your action in the streets and so on. And I kept thinking that it's funny how people think that these are some things that we think about putting there that are not related to our lived realities. Like, people think that we have the privilege to choose what to focus on, where in fact all of these things are affecting us. And it's not only a strategic or a tactical kind of questions. It's actually how we understand our reality. It's not that we're choosing now to focus on pinkwashing and forgetting the homophobia inside our society. It's how we understand this reality to be. It's how we understand the different forces that are operating against us. It's not us choosing from a basket of oppression what to focus on right now. We have a holistic view of how we view violence operating on us. And from a different kind of but related example, I also remember that once we started publishing on Tala'at before the first demonstration, a lot of men, obviously in that case, a lot of men were talking to us, demanding to know what our politics are and if we have anti-colonial point of view, because they're accustomed to feminist movements and NGOs being so depoliticized that we had to prove for a bunch of people that we are in fact anti-colonial and have good politics. And what I was constantly thinking and saying to these people is that if I have anti-colonial violence, it's not to prove to you that I'm good, and it's not to perform, it's not to get accepted in the political activism sphere in Palestine. It's because for me, being a feminist is obviously being anti-colonial everywhere, not only in Palestine. That's how I see feminism. And more so being a Palestinian living in here under a colonial regime and understanding what this colonial regime does to us on a daily basis. So if I have anti-colonial politics, it's not because I want you to accept me, it's because this is what is natural for me to be doing. And all of these examples come as part of this hierarchy of struggle. And of course, the whole, like, as I mentioned before, the whole issue of prioritizing. And I know that a lot of us prioritize, even subconsciously sometimes, and in different ways, and sometimes indirectly in what we do, because we have been so accustomed to do that. But I think it's more how we view things and what we put out there and what kind of analysis and action that we put out there to the world and to ourselves, and what kinds of views are we trying to put forward, and what kinds of action are we trying to put forward here in Palestine, because we've heard it a lot. Women's issues is not a priority. And first, it's not a women's issue. Having violence in our society is not an individualistic issue. It's not an identity issue. It's an issue that naturally and organically needs to concern every human being living in this society and wants to live in this society and wants to see a better reality and a better world for that matter.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? And our online audience, please, you can raise your hand if you have any question. So as we don't have any questions so far, Hala, I was thinking maybe, about these concerns that pressure you to express your anti-colonial motivations. Don't you think it's legitimate somehow? Because, we have the mainstream activism, feminist activism, that is clearly funded by, international institutions. And there's this very systematic depoliticization of women's issues. So I think maybe these concerns can be legitimate to a certain degree. What do you think about that?
I mean, I completely understand concern about any kind of political movement becoming to be in Palestine. I think it's in the complicated dynamics about how these things happen, because this is the first thing that is asked. This is the first thing that was asked when Tala'at came to be and started publishing. And if you only looked at what we were publishing, it was pretty clear what we were trying to put forward. Yani, nobody needed to explain that we're anti-colonial. You could just go to our Facebook page and see that we have clear anti-colonial views in politics. And frankly, I don't see this kind of question popping up at first when a different kind of movement arises in Palestine. And I guess I understand why, and I do know that there are causes for these kinds of questions, but I also believe that because of these feminist NGOization of feminism along the years, and depoliticization has also caused people to be anti-feminist. Even from hearing the word, like hearing the word has become like there is a direct anti to that word, like antagonism that is directly pointed when you hear feminism, even before you hear what the person has to say. And I think this also needs to be problematized. This also needs to be deconstructed. We also need to understand what this means and how to also problematizing while understanding why it came to be, and also to understand that we face these questions more from the male, let's say, comrades, if I can say that, and from the male activists. Like, this is the first thing that you see, because feminism became such a horrifying word for them to hear. And like I said, we need to problematize that as well, and understand that not all women in the Palestinian Society, and this is not something that we need to prove. Like, if you look around, you will see. If you look around, if you read a bit of history, and if you look around, you see that not all Palestinian feminists that you know are like that, but it's also how you have a responsibility as a person here also to understand what's happening in your society and the political sphere, rather than me always have to prove myself over and over again.
Thank you so much. Any questions, comments? Yes, go ahead, Khmena, please.
Thank you so much for this. It's really amazing to hear you speak. I have a question about building transnational solidarity, and how in your respective movements you are building or have built or are engaging with transnational solidarity across feminist, queer, anti-colonial, I don't know, anti-capitalist movements kind of internationally.
I'm smiling because I don't like to answer this question. Not because it's not important, because like I don't know how to start. I think like the experience of the queer movement with international solidarity is a very specific one. And I think someone mentioned the empire of critique, and I think the whole kind of the scope of this book is built on this international solidarity as the main scene of what queer organizing in Palestine was supposed to be, right? Engaging gay groups, specifically in North America, US, around pinkwashing, leading campaigns, which quickly became some kind of a identity politics, kind of a led campaign and kind of alliances. For alQaws, it took us a lot of years to understand that it's not our politics, it's not our solidarity. Like for instance, in 2000, wow, I'm too old to remember, but just like in early 2012 or 13, there was like a gay or a queer delegation coming to Palestine, right? And alQaws agreed to host them in a way. And we agreed to host this delegation in one condition, that we are not going to talk about queer issues. You are coming here to see the situation in Palestine, right? And the whole tension of the 2 weeks where these people want to just like hear about like, so how it feels to live here. Do you have a girlfriend? So how your parents are going? If I go to this like Palestinian family, should I tell them I have a husband or a girlfriend, right? Like really like that experience for me is just like traumatic in a very like deep way, but not like in a, you know, I'm still having a grudge around it, but it's just like really a political moment of saying, oh wow, that's not really obvious that if you come to support Palestine, you know, like what you say about your husband in this like refugee camps is just not important, right? Coming as a gay activist and then wanted to be the gay activist in this context as the main thing was really kind of problematic. And that, like, I'm not mentioning this specifically because it happened everywhere in every interaction, and we took a step back, right? And we understood that, like, being in contact with anti-border movement, not necessarily queers, Latinx, actually anti-capitalist, anti-racist kind of movement, feminist movement. That's where alQaws political alliances and less the international kind of an LGBT celebrities, queers, like kind of a. So we shifted our work to focus inside like Palestine, while holding this like international kind of an internationalist kind of a political commitment. We use that to actually deepening our work on grassroots, and even like alQaws taking itself from the BDS kind of work, we shifted that work to building alliances with queer Palestinian living in North America, right? And really lean into our like strength as a grassroots movement, and really build these like strong connection and on a broad kind of stronger kind of value and political commitment. So that is my experience with the international solidarity. I think a lot of these questions always are directed to Palestinians, but I think we are in a time also that it should be answered not by Palestinians, right? I think we all like working on our, that's my opinion, like working on our local universities, local context, our village, our city, our government. That's where the strength of the international alliances should lay down, in my opinion. And this is where we are like stronger, more connected to our like context, to our land, to our like really real issues. and not only solidarity as like something we consume or something we do, right? Like, so I know I didn't answer specifically the question, but I wanted to share that like experience that I always want to write about it, and I don't have even the words to describe like this shift that alQaws made in how we understand our like positionality also in this like in this context. We don't need to do events to international activists who boycotting Israel. Like that should not be the labor of Palestinians. You know, and this is where we are going with specifically the BDS framework and the international alliances. And this is not how I see real sustainable, long-term, organic kind of international alliances.
That was why it was really hard to have you, to convince you to participate today, I assume. But also, I mean, to make the context clear, unlike Geneva, the international in our mind as Palestinians is associated with the whitewashed, you know, concept of solidarity, which is true because, you know, this is the mainstream, this is the attitude when it comes to, you know, solidarity tourism. And yeah, so I fully understand. However, I think, as Haneen mentioned, it's important to make connections with our own understanding of the international, with indigenous people, with Black movements and indigenous movements. Hala, would you like to add something here?
Not maybe, yani, like Haneen said, I'm not gonna say something that is completely different. And I also I can't speak about Tala'at's experience in that because Tala'at doesn't have many experience in that, to be honest. We know, and continuing from what is said, obviously Tala'at gained a lot of attention from many white folks who wanted to learn about Tala'at. That I can say for sure. And I think what was Haneen talking about, and this is what we were accustomed to in Palestine. We were the objects of solidarity, but not even the solidarity the way I imagine solidarity. We were totally victimized, as if we don't have any kind of agency. And for me, practicing solidarity with Palestine doesn't mean coming here, doesn't mean talking to me, or doesn't mean volunteering in my villages. It means working against your own governments and your own regimes that are feeding the Israeli regime. Any kind of protest that happens against any kind of regime in the world is directly benefiting me as a Palestinian. So that's the first level. But the second level, I think, from the different side, once we understood that solidarity can mean different thing, and that actually solidarity is something really necessary in political movement, at least in my point of view, I want to actively practice solidarity with other oppressed groups in the world, anti-colonial, anti-racist, groups that are operating in the world, because we are connected in a way, and we are fighting the same forces. But I think the problem is that even this kind of thing went to a place that is centered around really big abstract statements, but with no actual practice on the ground. We don't know still how to practice solidarity. So we either try to find concrete similarities between us and those different groups, and I don't think this is necessary in solidarity to be completely similar in the details of our struggle, or that we are accustomed to be those who are delivered solidarity and not who don't practice solidarity, because sometimes oppressed groups tend to feel like they are the only oppressed people out there in the world, where there are millions of people suffering out there in the world and are engaged in continued struggle. So for me, the question is how to practice active solidarity and what solidarity actually means. And this is, for me, this is a question that is yet to be answered, at least for me. And these are questions that we engage with in Tala'at, and we were in contact with different feminist groups in Latin America and trying to organize together. And unfortunately, it didn't yield to anything concrete yet, but it's definitely something that we grapple with and we deal with, and we ask ourselves, how do we practice solidarity? Because like I said, for me, I don't see the Palestinian cause as an exception. I don't see it as a separate, unique cause. Of course, it has its specific details. It is a specific context, but it's related to my struggle against Israel is related to other struggles in the world. And I fully support any person who is protesting oppression. And I support struggles against types of oppression everywhere. And there is a need to practice active solidarity. And the question remains, how do we do that in a way that is serious, in a way that doesn't strip the other groups from their own specificities and tools of action, and how also to practice solidarity in spite of that. Yeah, this is my reflection.
Thank you so much. I think I speak for everyone when I say that this was really amazing, informative, and very helpful. Do we have anything else? I think someone from the BDS.
Yeah, no, well, thank you both. That was amazing. This has been so interesting. And yeah, I love the idea of like thinking about how we can continue to practice active solidarity. I'm here as one of the organizers from BDS and the Apartheid Free Zone campaign here in Geneva. And I'm sure, as all of you know, BDS, well, the movement to boycott divestment and sanctions started in 2005 when Palestinian civil society launched, made demands for us to boycott and against institutions that are complicit in Israel's apartheid regime, and for international sanctions against Israel for its discriminatory policies and illegal occupation. The Apartheid Free Zone in Geneva and across the world is an international campaign which calls for solidarity with the Palestinian people by creating a network of spaces or collectives who refuse to collaborate with the Israeli apartheid regime and its oppression of the Palestinian people. And here in Geneva, we're made up of 60 associations, collectives, cafes, bars, venues, and other spaces. And we're really excited that as of today, QISA is going to become our 61st member. So that's great news. And yeah, we're just thrilled to have been invited to organize this event. I'm so happy that we got to hear from you and grow from your beautiful, wonderful reflections. And yeah, I invite you all as individuals and as organizations to come and organize with us and to keep thinking about this question of how we're going to commit to active solidarity. So yeah, if you want to know more about our details, I can share emails and websites and things if you want to come and find me after. But yeah, thank you both again so much. This has been great. I've had such a wonderful time hearing from both of you, and yeah, I'm excited to keep working together.
Thank you. Thank you so much for organizing this and for having us. It was a real pleasure. Yeah, thank you so much.
And for having also this relaxed, chill kind of vibe.
Yeah.
So thank you for the invitation and for listening.
Thank you so much to like our amazing speakers. Really super insightful, super important, and I mean, very important for us as queer, feminist, anti-racist, anti-capitalist, anti-colonial student activists here in Geneva, one of like the centers of power and like neoliberal capitalism. So it's definitely like very, very important to hear what you've got to say. and especially as being part of the Decolonizing Sexuality Month. I just wanted to end this event by speaking a little bit about the Decolonial Action Network as one of the co-organizers of this event, which started as a community of students that came together in support to endorse the votes for the BDS movement and to become the vote to endorse the BDS movement and to become signatories to the Apartheid Free Zone Declaration with our student association, QISA. And thanks to the effort of all of the students that mobilized, organized, and advocated in support for the BDS and the Apartheid Free Zone movements, the Graduate Institute Student Association, QISA, became the first student association in Switzerland to officially endorse BDS. So this is how the Decolonial Action Network was born. And as we're nurturing and growing our movement, we are trying to continue organizing for more visibility and support for the struggle of Palestinian liberation, and to bring the ongoing illegal occupation of Palestine by Israel and the Israeli apartheid regime to our conversation, as well as the Israeli settler colonial regime, and also to mobilize in support for all decolonial, anti-colonial, anti-capitalist feminist queer struggles. And one of our main actions right now that we're trying to develop is to mobilize in support of Tarek Abu Matar, a Palestinian student that was admitted to the Graduate Institute a couple of years ago. And he was supposed to start his master's in the anthropology and sociology department here in Geneva. But because of his student activism, he was put under a travel ban by Israel. And then he was arrested, brutally tortured, and put on administrative detention, and then sentenced to 4 years in an Israeli colonial prison. And he wrote a letter to us, asking us to support these votes. And now we are writing a letter back to him that also serves kind of as a petition to demand his immediate release, to demand the end of the settler colonial and apartheid regime that Israel imposes on Palestinians, and to advocate for Tarek to be able to come here to Geneva and to study with us. So we're going to distribute some information about this if you want to know more about the Decolonial Action Network and how you can support this mobilization for one of our fellow students currently in prison. So thank you so much.
Thank you.